it's Melanie Ham. Welcome to my channel. Today I am going to talk with you about how to use color in your craft projects, your quilts, your sewing projects. I think this is something that really trips people up. So I'm going to give you 5 tips for experimenting with color and fabric choices in your quilting. So the first thing that I wanted to be sure to bring up is that it's not always the color that you want to look for. Like in terms of the specific color, like the calming blue or the bright pink or whatever it might be. A lot of times it's the value. Now the value, I'm not going to get too much into like super deep color theory. I actually do have an art degree. I have a Bachelor of Arts degree, emphasis in art history. So even though I wrote a lot of papers in college and studied art, it actually is an art degree. So I've done 2-dimensional design, 3-dimensional design, color theory, drawing classes, all that kind of stuff. So my background is in that in terms of my education, but I'm not going to get too much into that for this video. If you want to learn more about that, you can leave me comments down below. But I want to just kind of like brush the surface and give you some easy tips that you can incorporate that aren't like too heady or too difficult to understand. One of those things is value, and value is actually whether it's light or dark. So you can have like very light fabrics, very dark fabrics, and then things in the middle. Here's an example. We've got a light blue, a medium blue, and a dark blue. This would be different value. They're all blue, but they're different values, meaning they're different shades of the light and dark. That's something that really has to play a key part, especially in your quilting. Because if your quilt is all the same value, it's going to have a specific look, and it might be something that you're looking for, but generally we want some of that movement with our eye to see, you know, some of those colors receding back and some of those colors popping forward. I'll show you an example of this with my daughter's quilts. You can see here with some of the fabrics that I've selected, these are fabrics from all different lines of fabric. So a lot of this is Sarah Jane fabrics, but I did incorporate other fabrics from other designers. So it's not necessarily all the same line of fabric, which is one way of doing it. But this way, you can see how we have much more bright and saturated colors. We also have kind of mid-tone pinks. And then we have some prints here that have much more of a lighter tone. What makes the patchwork look of this quilt successful is those lights and darks. Okay, so it's not just the colors themselves, it's pink, right? But it's the light and the dark and sort of how those play together that really make it special. One of the tips that I always recommend for determining value in your quilt is to take a photograph and put it in black and white. So I recommend this all the time when you're doing your layout. But when you're picking your fabrics, it's good to sort of think about that in your mind, because you'll want to have all of that spread out evenly amongst your quilt. So you don't want, you know, like 2 of your blocks super dark and then the rest of them super light, because it's not going to kind of go together cohesively. So you can take a photo when you're doing your layout, make it black and white, and that will really help you see the value of your layout. You can also squint your eyes. You kind of like squint your eyes and you look through your eyelashes, and that can kind of give you an idea too of the light and dark as well. Tip number 2 is you can use the color wheel, and some of the, you know, you always hear use complementary colors and you'll always know that they match. And I always kind of scratch my head when I hear that, because I'm like, yeah, complementary colors almost always look like a sports team. Like, I don't know what to tell you because I don't care, but I always see the San Diego Chargers or the Denver Broncos or the Chicago Bears every time I see some of these complementary colors. You know, the LA Lakers, you know, we see these like really bright saturated colors like the yellow and the purple and the blue and the orange and all of that, and those are like across the color wheel, so they are complementary, but it doesn't mean that they have to be the biggest, boldest, brightest version of that color, right? For example, yellow and purple are across the color wheel from each other, right? So yellow and purple. So here's an example of a yellow and a purple that don't look like the LA Lakers because it's not just the biggest, boldest versions of those colors, it's also their tints, which are the lighter colors, and their shades, which are the darker colors, right? So like you can have a very like light pink and a very light green, because red and green go across from each other, and almost always that reads very Christmas, but a pale pink and a pale green go together all the time. We see it in nature, and those are going to be colors that are going to work really well together. So think about it in terms of matching colors, in terms of complementary colors, as in the full range of that color, not just the biggest, most saturated, or even the same value of those colors that have to match. You can kind of use that color, the whole range of it. My third tip is, as well as the value of that color, is also the scale of the print and the contrast. So what I mean by that is, let's take a look at these 3 fabrics. And the main color of these 3 fabrics is all a dark blue. Okay? We've got a dark blue in these 3 colors, but they are all different. They have a different print, and not even, even a similar print. This would be considered probably a smaller print. This one has some other colors in it, and this one has a good amount of white. But really the base color of all of those is a dark blue. What's contrasting about these prints is something you want to take into consideration when you're looking at your prints. So they're all the same color per se, the main color, but they're contrasting in the scale of their print and the way that the prints interact with each other. Okay, so you can have some prints that have a very bold kind of print, maybe a very large scale print, but it's still mainly that same color, and it's going to be very high contrast with something that reads more like a solid like this, because fabrics that have a smaller print, or with a lot of that fabric showing through the background, it's going to read a little bit more like a solid when you put it on a quilt, right? So these two, even though they're both mainly blue, they are still in very high contrast with each other. And that's something that you also want to think about when you're determining your layout and you're picking fabrics. If you're not using a fabric line where all of that's kind of been done for you, and you're kind of using your scraps or anything like that, that's something else to think about. Number 4 is, I sort of mentioned this with tip number 1. Tip number 1 was take a look at the value and not just the color. Tip number 4 is don't be afraid to put some of those kind of muddy colors in there. So for example, here's a different example with that muddy color. We've got this kind of like muddy brown that's helping that red pop up, okay? So you can use that same kind of a mentality when you're doing your layout. Okay, so when you're building a block, let's say like this block, these are all small prints. They all read kind of like a solid a little bit because they're all small prints. But we can pair some of these with a little bit more muted color palette to help our darker fabric sort of pop up. Okay, so this isn't the best example, but you understand what I'm saying. You have like these muddier colors. So you have this like muddy color back behind the leaf, and it makes that green bigger, bolder, and much more able to stand out. So when you're creating a quilt block, if you really want something to stand out, you can kind of surround it with a gray and make that a big bold color, and it'll be really, really pretty. Tip number 5 is to, if you're really having trouble and you want somewhere to jump off of, is to pick a focus fabric. And sometimes that is not always the best advice to start with. I think some of these other things are better to sort of take into consideration first, because let's say, for example, this fabric. It's a beautiful fabric with lots of different colors in it. That's why I picked it. And this is a big print, right? So what we would want to do is think about the scale and the value. So this is a big print. It's got some spots where we have some darker shades here. We've got some lighter spots in the middle. We can pull some of the purples and the blues and pick different values of those colors that we pick. There's also like I would also definitely include this kind of like mustardy color. We even have a hunter green in here. So when you're using a focus fabric, it's not just like pick other fabrics that kind of look like this. It's taking a look, okay, this is a big print, okay? The repeat is quite large on this fabric. So we don't want to have too many of those on one quilt, okay? Just a few. Then we want to have a few that are sort of in the middle range, and then a few that are much more like a solid, or read kind of like a solid fabric. That kind of creates the more cohesive look from jumping off with one fabric. So that's another way that you can get a little bit of help and get started when you are pulling fabrics together for a new project. And I really want to wrap this all up by saying there's no wrong answer. I don't believe that there's a wrong answer. It is what you like. Everybody starts to build their aesthetic based on their own taste and their experience and the things that they have learned. Some people might be just sort of naturally inclined and understand how this all works, and some people it might be harder for them. But if you like it, you think it looks great, and it's working for you, then it's good. Then it's right, and it's right for you. And I don't think that you should be too hung up on making it look perfect or making it look a certain way. Some of those things will come with experience and experimenting, because you will never maybe know if some of these fabrics look good up next to each other until you put them into a quilt and you try it out. I have this quilt here I wanted to show you to demonstrate this. This quilt, look at this. This was a charm pack my mom brought back for me from Japan when she went and visited there. These fabrics don't look anything like they would go together. It is definitely very scrappy. There's not really a consistent color theme, except that it's kind of girly and it has some flowers and has some pinks in there. But it is very varied, okay? But it's beautiful. And it looks great, and it's one of my daughter's favorite quilts. It's backed with Minky. It's one of her very favorites. I just had to go pull this out of her bed to show it to you. Okay, so there are sometimes things might not look quite right when they're like in big fabric form next to each other, but when you cut them all up and you put them together and you quilt it and you wash it and you love it, then it turns out a little bit different than you might expect. So do it, go for it, have fun, experiment, you know, just have fun with it, and really I just really want to encourage you guys. There's no wrong answer. It's fun, you know, just like go for it. That's what I say. Okay, so one last thing I wanted to mention. I showed you this block. This is actually called the Friendship Star block. I have two other versions. This one, can you see that one? It's the background has a print on it, but it's kind of hard to see. I'll get a close-up. And then this one. This is a Friendship Star. I am starting a new quilt along, an online quilt along. We will be making a quilt top all together. It's gonna span several months. We're gonna work on this, it's called the Modern 9-Patch Mashup, which is, we're gonna be doing a bunch of different types of blocks. I'm gonna be teaching you color theory. You can see how these are all the same block, but they look very different based on the way that I set it up, right? So I'm gonna be teaching you color theory, the scale, how to pick fabrics, show you the different variations on all of these blocks. And we're gonna do it all together. It's gonna be a private Facebook group. I'll be doing live videos just to that audience on our off week, because we're gonna be doing new lessons every other week to make it low stress and really easy for you guys to follow along, very beginner friendly. If you're interested in that, you can go to mashupquilt.com. I've got the early bird pricing set up for you guys, and the pricing will be going up once we start. All the details will be at mashupquilt.com, all the current information that I have. If you have any other questions, you can leave a comment down below. That's all for now. Hope you guys enjoyed this video on learning how to use color with your quilt projects, sewing projects, craft projects. I hope it gave you guys some ideas and some tips. Leave me any questions down below and let me know if you have any other tips or things that you guys like to incorporate in your projects. And that's it. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Bye.